someone I look up to on LinkedIn for inputs and advice. I kind of look forward to her posts. Unraveling challenges and solutions for various problems that remote teams face. I kind of personally follow Ali Greene. We're speaking to, so I've got this fortunate opportunity to be able to talk to her, to bring her to all of you to kind of explore and understand specifically about remote work culture and how to go about that, right? Because that's one of the topics that scares people a lot. It scares me a lot. It's a topic that it's like an amoeba. You can't put your hands around it. It's that kind of a nebulous topic, and in fact, I would say it's one of the topics that probably the naysayers of remote, right? That's probably the biggest problem they pick up, right? Saying, hey, how do I build a culture when I'm remote? So I can't do that. So Office is the solution, right? So today we're going to kind of debunk that myth that uh, good culture needs Office as a foundational element. So we're going to debunk that. So Ali Greene is a remote work advocate. She's been in her past life. She's been head of people, head of culture at various organizations. The last one being Oyster. So she's been there, done that, and now she operates as an independent professional. She's the co-author of a book called Remote Works. Remote Works is probably regarded as one of the best out there for a DIY. If a founder wants to do DIY on remote. So when I was talking to her earlier, Ali Green, I said, so the book replaces me, right? Instead of people calling me, they could use the book, right? That is the it is very selfless way to say why you wrote the book, right? So a lot of people do things to make them indispensable, but then you were doing the opposite of that. Anyway, so long story short, very fortunate to have you here, Ali. It's an honor to host you on our series on the series that we do on LinkedIn and YouTube. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this conversation.
Thank you again. So before I get deep into the topic, Ali, why don't we hear from you an introduction, and also in that process, if you could also talk about the kind of work that you do with companies that you work with.
Yeah, definitely. So my background working remotely takes me all the way back to 2014, though when I was in the process of writing my book, I realized there are aspects of remote work in my entire career journey. So even thinking back to internships I had while I was in university and the way in which we worked with people in different satellite offices, and really utilizing technology to make communication easier and more transparent and the operations better for everybody. And so I saw that in my early days with internships, with work that I did at rapidly growing startups where we outgrew an office and had to get another office and another office, and then eventually expanded to, international locations as well. And so when people say they're afraid of remote work, I like to remind them that in some form or fashion, you've likely had an experience with remote work previous to the past couple of years. And so I use that mindset along with my background in organizational behavior to really help companies understand how to make it work for them. Only you as a CEO, a founder, a head of people can truly understand the nuances of your own company. And so what I do in my work, especially through the book Remote Works, is offer frameworks instead of, plug and play advice so that leaders can ask themselves important questions on how to get the work done. And of course, throughout the course of my work, if people want an extra helping hand, I also focus on learning and development, so training for teams or independent professionals, as well as hands-on fractional work.
Awesome. Again, like I said, love the nuggets of wisdom that you keep sharing on LinkedIn. Like I said, so I think I'm sure many people find the same. So now coming to the book, right? So and again, I can see why you're a remote work advocate, right? So you've kind of you've been a practitioner from all the way till 24. It was not new to you, right? So I was going to ask you that question, but I'm going to skip that because it's kind of quite evident as to why you support remote work, and you yourself are a proponent of it, right? I think you're taking this call from France, if I'm not wrong, right? So yeah, so it kind of says that all, right? I mean, believe in what you do. But I would love to understand what led you to the book. You and Tam decided to put this together, labor of love, right? What led you to do this, and you already probably spoke about what you wanted it to be a guide rather than prescriptive advice, right? But why don't you talk more about the book and what could people expect from it, take away from it once you download and read through it or buy it?
Yeah, definitely. And so I'll start the story a little bit before when it actually starts, and to talk to your points about the lived benefits that I've had with remote work. It's really something like core to who I am as a person. I'm in France. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Croatia. I've had many years experiencing life as what some people label a digital nomad. And while this is a very privileged and luxurious way of living remote work, for me, it's really opened up doors that I couldn't find when I was living in, my home country for 12 months out of the year. And so things that I struggled with, and I hear this conversation a lot these days, is, kind of feelings of where do I fit in? Who is my community? How can I learn from people and feel connected? And not experience things like loneliness. And as a young worker, when I was first starting out my career, I moved to new cities to have access for better jobs. And through those moves, I realized I was starting over in terms of who can I call on for support that's local to me, who are my friends, and of course they become the people you work with, and you're in these office environments and you become really close with the people you see every day. But what happens when you then leave and move on to your next company? What does the state of those relationships then? And so this is something that I questioned for a long part of my early adult journey with my relationship to work. And when I started traveling and I really separated who my community was from who I work with, I realized that I could have great friends with people that I worked with, but I could also make friends in different countries through my travels
Right.
and find a community of people that thought about life differently. Through that, I met Tam. And we met in Cape Town, South Africa, when both of us were there working remotely. It's where I've met, a good amount of my close friends, also my partner. And so for me, that's my personal story. And everybody that I talk to with remote work has the version of this. Maybe it means they
Hmm.
spent more time with their children. Maybe it means they have elderly parents and they want to be part of their family life for longer, or they didn't want to have to move in order to get a better job, or there's some sort of challenge that they're facing in their life and they want work to be more accessible, and by having flexibility in how they work, they're able to make that happen for themselves. And
Right.
I hear all these stories all the time, and it's why I love remote work so much. But a certain thing happened during the early days of the pandemic, and I think everybody has a COVID story. What happened for me is I noticed in March 2020, I was planning to learn how to ski. Life took me in a different direction because the ski resort closed. And I hear within the span of 24 hours, all of these media outlets, my phone was getting all these WhatsApp messages from friends, from strangers about, we have 24 hours to work remotely and we don't even own laptops, or, how remote work isn't going to work. And I had this moment along with Tam as we were catching up on a call. If leaders don't recognize that they can't just send people home with laptops and continue business as normal, then they're not going to learn the skill sets, the behaviors, and the mindset to work
Hmm.
remotely. And if
Hmm.
that doesn't happen, remote work is going to become a scapegoat to force people back in the office once the pandemic had ended. And I felt really angry and very upset that they were going to take this thing that allowed me so much pleasure in my life to work remotely and really altered the course of my life, and blame it as a way to get people back in the office. And we see some of that today. And I think people are still asking themselves the wrong questions. It's
Right.
not, do we work better in an office or do we work better at home? It's neither. It's, we work better in a way that works for us. And so, how do we
Right.
cultivate culture in a company that allows for that level of freedom and flexibility and autonomy, so people can really design their own life? And so, through that sort of like emotional roller coaster is where this desire to write a book came from, because Tam and I really wanted to educate people on how do we make remote work work. And even in our two companies at the time, she was working at Automatic, one of the largest remote, only
Hmm.
companies. I was
Hmm.
at DuckDuckGo, just sort of ended my position at DuckDuckGo. And in our conversations, realizing in a lot of ways, these two companies had the same values and the same goals around things like documentation, transparency, working remotely, but tactically each company did it very differently. And so that's also why I say you can't just, plug and play what you learn from other
Correct.
people. You need to
Right.
make it for yourselves. And so that was the goal behind the book.
Awesome. I think, and specifically for early stage companies, I mean, such as GoFlow itself, right? Till probably you turn 100 employee or 100 plus, you don't have a culture shepherd, or you don't have a people success person, right? It's the founders and the team kind of that has to take care of itself to create this culture, create the way of working, right? So when you don't have an individual who's got the responsibility to make all of this happen, right? Everybody has to learn to embrace each other's flexibility, the freedom of sorts that they have, right, and empathize as they always say. So I think it's crucial. I think it's not just for the founders. I would presume that the book has a lot more for every individual, certainly for managers along the way, right? Because it's the whole organization has to kind of adapt itself to this way of thinking, right? And all these blinders that we keep having happening, right? Hey, how do I? You can't be innovative in your remote, right? You can't collaborate in your remote, right? A new employee will find very disconnected when they join a remote company. A lot of blinders, and like I said, a lot of scapegoats are being identified, right? To kind of flip the switch later on, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a mindset switch that everybody in the organization has to do. It's not just the founders.
Yeah. And it really depends on the stage of the company and where you're at. You can have founders that, are really on board with certain ideologies around remote work. They want to hire the best talent globally. They want to make sure that they don't have any time zone gaps in providing things like customer service.
Right.
And you can buy into that and still feel uncomfortable in yourself learning how to work remotely. And you see this sometimes with companies, especially companies that made the shift to remote. Of okay, from like an ideology standpoint, I understand remote work, I like it, but me as the CEO, me as the founder, I have worked so hard in my career to build a routine. I go to this place, this office that has meaning to me. And I
Right.
think a challenge for people these days is reconciling that two things can be true at the same time. You can support and offer and, be a role model for behaviors that support flexibility and know the best thing for yourself is different and keep
Mhm.
those things in their own lane, so to speak.
Right, right. So that leads me to my next question, Ali. Right. So when companies approach you for help, right, they hit the SOS button. What do they usually hit it for? Right. What do they usually call you for in terms of help? And we'll come to the culture part of the focus of our conversation, right? But in general, right, culture and other things, right? Where do you think is the grayest of gray areas that they kind of the fog sets in, and they need a navigator such as yourselves to navigate that, right? What do they come to you for?
Yeah, I think the first thing is really understanding how to define culture because everything stems from there. And so usually people might think of culture as like how you engage with your team or what the socialization looks like. And the first thing I like to do when I'm working with people or even on LinkedIn, just sharing, aspects of remote work that I really believe in is redefining culture and making it really about the standard operating behaviors. How do people
Mhm.
act in your organization? Not so much like a certain singular activity like a Zoom happy hour that I think at this point in time most people detest. And so once you realize that you're talking about how do people operate in my organization, there's a few key pillars that consistently stand out where people are not investing necessarily in an intentional way that will create that culture shift. And so one
Right,
huge area is communication. I'm pretty sure worldwide there's different memes that exist around, the kind of saying this meeting could have been an email. We're recognizing we're not communicating effectively anymore
right,
in work in general, whether it's remote work, hybrid work, or in an office. There's a lot of wasted time communicating, and at the same time people want more connection. And so how do you do that? And I
right,
think you do that through something that I love to help people get better at, streamlining your asynchronous communication, getting really good at setting expectations and learning the behaviors around asynchronous, and then using your meeting time to build relationships instead. And so that's one key component is how do we communicate as an organization? what does it look like? When do we do meetings, and how do we communicate asynchronously? If you're getting good at those skills, you're already starting to level up, how you work remotely. From there, I hear a lot of fear, I would say, with leaders around, okay, we're communicating, that's good, but what about holding people accountable? What about project
Mm.
management? In the office, if someone wasn't responding fast enough, I could just walk by their desk and start a conversation and check in with them on the progress of certain work,
Right.
or remind them that I'm waiting on something that's holding me back in getting my work done. And
Mm.
so learning how to shift those behaviors again, in terms of, you're not just going to accidentally bump into someone and then remind them that they owe you something in terms of tasks and moving projects forward. You need to really create a structure around accountability. And in a lot of companies, they have project managers leading that charge. In remote, everybody's a project manager. You're
Right.
responsible for getting your own work done and for being transparent that you did that work. And so it's time for the next person to take the lead in the process at hand. And so I really like helping people think of project management, accountability, goal setting in a different way. And the third pillar, which is my absolute favorite, because I think this is truly where you get the biggest benefit of remote work, is flexibility. And it's not just flexibility of where, but flexibility of how, with whom, when, all of those things. And so really
Right.
thinking about managing energy and not time, and looking at productivity differently. You're not productive because you're working from the hours of 9 to 5. You're productive
Right.
because you're accomplishing tasks and you're pushing projects forward and you're adding value to an organization. So how do you, as a manager, understand that and help your team realize where, when, how they work best? And so those are the three pillars that, Tam and I focus on a lot as we think through all of the topics in remote works where people usually want extra help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very valid points, and I think I kind of specifically noted down a few very significant statements that you made along the way, right? And I would love to also add. So, for example, one of the things that you said is like keeping work happens async. Meetings are for getting to know each other, or like the social aspects of being in a team, right? I mean, in India, right, the companies that we also work with, quite a few remote first companies, right? So we've seen that happen, right? We've seen right out of the pandemic, a lot of meetings were being organized for getting work done. Like, hey, let's like there's a plan, we need to crack at it. Well, if everybody's in the same room, we can align everybody, we can commit to the timeline. Or so it was more about work, right? Getting ticking things off the project plan, right? But now we are seeing that it's completely for all the social reasons, right? It's not about work, right? So this meetings are intentional because I mean there's an event or there's a milestone, there's something the event is around, but it is not about sitting together and cracking at a presentation, or cracking at a business plan, or cracking at a project plan, and getting things ticked off, right? I think that comes with maturity, I believe, right? So as companies mature through their implementation of remote, they realize that meetings and all of this can be async, right? So you can get a lot of things done while being async. So that's a very very important observation that I also wanted to kind of make from what we're seeing. So now jumping into the culture kind of question, right? I want you to kind of take two probably parallel examples. It could be real example that you worked with, or you can assimilate the knowledge from across the board, right? So I want to talk about take you through the simpler, in my mind at least, a simpler problem statement. A startup that, or a company that's forming today, right? It's a new company, right? It was just probably till yesterday it was founder, co-founder, or founder, lead engineer, senior engineer. Now they're building a team. They're building a team of 5 people. They're recruiting, right? They're starting a team, right? So how should they approach culture, right? How would and again I said easier because there's a clean slate. You don't have to erase anything to write on top of it. So how would you I mean, what kind of challenges or what kind of issues they end up facing while trying to set up a positive remote culture? What do they end up overlooking or not emphasizing enough, right? And you worked between US, Europe. You worked with multiple companies of all sizes at different stages, 0 to 1, 1 to 100 companies. So what have you seen as challenges faced in the 0 to 1 stage for companies that are starting afresh?
Yeah, I think 0 to 1, it's really easy to not have processes in place and to just like waver and get your work done. It's not necessarily always intentional because you're working fast and you're learning how you go, especially with your first few hires. And so I would say take a step back, and if you can at that stage, slow down and do two things. Write down what your ideal working environment feels like for, you know, what the goals are of the mission of the company, and who your clients are and who you're going to be engaging with work, and think through, you know, instead of just going the easy way and working, you know, in a fast way but not a clean way, how today can we implement things that will help us shape our remote work culture? Is it that, you know, we feel really strongly within ourselves that it's going to be quite challenging to work across too many time zones? What are the potential time zone limitations you want to hire? And maybe strategically make your hires at the cap ends of that, instead of just, you know, hiring the person that's, you know, right here in your local network. By
Mm-hmm.
doing that, you're already starting a forcing function of asking yourself important questions, and those questions
Right.
being around things like, you know, what are the rituals we're going to do at work to make sure that we're getting our work done? What are the behaviors that is going to be our company culture, and how does it, you know, look and feel given, you know, maybe multi like cultural behavioral norms? If you're working in an environment where you really want to lead with, you know, rapid experimentation and beta testing and look towards the data, how do you then bring in a team member who's used to building relationships before they look at the numbers? And ask yourself those questions, and start just, you know, you don't need the answers. I think the biggest mistake 0 to 1 makes is thinking they have all the answers. I think at this point in time, it's better to just know what the right questions are. And
Mm.
the reason I say that is because my second point here is don't get too attached to any outcome. I
Right.
learned a really great anecdote from a good friend of mine and another remote work leader, Darcy. And she said that with every 7 people, um, this might have also come from another remote leader, Tyler, but we were in a session a few months back, and someone said, with every 7 people, your culture can change. And so if you think 0 to 1 and you're writing down values and you're thinking, this is it, this is forever, and then you have a team of 20 people, it's not going to be forever. You're going to have to revisit these things and see, like,
Right.
how are we growing, what's changing, and things like that. So check in with people, check in with your values. And the biggest advice I'd have for how to check in on values is write them down and ask yourself, what is this value defined in? How does it show up in my organization today? How can I change how this shows up? What new behaviors, what new documentation, what new rituals do we need to act according to this value at 10 people, at 20 people, at 500 people? And if you can start asking those types of questions, I think you'll also give yourself a clear roadmap of where to go.
Right. No, well said. I think the question part that you talked about, right? Knowing the questions that you need, because it's always a work in progress, and like you said, it's not, you can't set something in stone and then say this is how it's going to be, right? It's to kind of constantly revisit those questions and keep asking those questions again and again, right? And you talked about rituals, right? So again, that's another word that is used quite frequently whenever the word culture comes up, right? Uh, some anecdotal examples of rituals that you've seen at companies at DuckDuckGo or at Oyster or other companies you're working with, right? So some anecdotal examples could you share in terms of what uh, establishes the culture or exemplifies the culture of, like, let's say you took transparency as an example, right? So if I take one of the values, how do these rituals exemplify them, or how do they magnify them for everybody to see? Any examples you could refer to?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll give first an example just from how we operate as a business within remote works, because I think practicing what you preach is really important. And this
Yeah.
also goes to that small team size. You know, on occasion, we might work with outside freelancers or vendors, but for the most part, it's just me and Tam. And so when we first started, we didn't have a plan. We didn't have that roadmap. We're friends. So we communicated mainly using WhatsApp. And we realized that, values that we had around documentation and making sure that we can easily find an answer to a question instead of having to, bother the other person for that answer was a really strongly held value in terms of getting remote work done. We
Mm-hmm.
also valued knowing how to support each other, but in a way that honored our own time and our own energy, working with each other in different time zones, and also being um, naturally more inclined to work at different hours of the day. And so those were our overarching values and our goals in terms of creating our own team culture. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that we put that into action, the ritual that we had was an asynchronous stand up. So every Monday for 24 hours, we had a template that was in our project management tool that we finally shifted to once we realized that we wanted to be very intentional about these cultural aspects. And it would pop up with what days are we available for in like synchronous time if we need it. And every week that could change. And so we really
Mm-hmm.
highlighted at the beginning of the week what's our availability for synchronous stuff? What is the things that we are most looking forward to getting done this week that we're going to hold each other accountable? What are the
Mm-hmm.
things in order to accomplish that task this week that we need help from other people? What is the deadline to get that done so the other person isn't left hanging? And when do we expect to spend time working on that? And that's something that we would see from each other and comment in that document. And so our ritual on Mondays was really working through the plan for the week. How does this work? Do we understand everything? Does this need to be escalated to a synchronous meeting? And so that's a way that we worked with each other to make sure things were transparent, to make sure we felt like we could ask for help, but not take up an hour's worth of our time every week if we didn't need it. Because some weeks things were just, moving forward, everything was going as planned. And some weeks we were like,
Right.
actually, wait, like, let's go talk about this. And so another ritual we have is blocked off time on our calendar where we can choose to talk, but we don't need to. And that way we can
Okay.
plan our week around this sort of, standing time. And if we end up not talking with one another, we get time back to do more heads down focused work. And so the assumption of having the time so we don't have to waste time finding time, but
Right.
assuming no meeting unless a meeting needs to happen was a really good ritual that worked for us. A more fun example and something that scales tremendously well in an organization is an example from my DuckDuckGo days. And so one of the values at DuckDuckGo is really about, building a culture of thanks and showing recognition, especially as a way to reinforce certain cultural values, like questioning assumptions, was a really strong one there. And we had this thing called the green bow tie. And so already using shared words and language, it's like really fun to talk about something kind of silly like a green bow tie. And the way the ritual worked is that at every all hands meeting, the person who won from the week before was able to pass along recognition and thanks to somebody else. But of course, we wanted the whole team to get involved. So as the company got larger, because at first, with 30 people, you kind of have an idea of what everyone's working on. But as we were nearing like 50 people, it got harder to remember who was
Right.
doing what. And so we added a second stage in the ritual process. And so this goes to show how things can build as companies
Right.
scale,
Mm-hmm.
where people could nominate others that did really like cool, amazing work that week. And then the
Mm-hmm.
person who won it read from the nominee list. And we started getting people writing like haikus, making rhymes, like being very creative about showing recognition and making it very fun. And so I think that really helped people feel like they were doing a good job. People were seeing them do a good job. They were having fun with giving thanks. And it was something that every week people looked forward to see, who is gonna be nominated and who is gonna win.
Oh, that's quite an interesting ritual, I must say, right? And this was happening in a remote setting, as in, so it would be a synchronous virtual meet where everybody comes and the nominees are read out and
Yeah, so the nominees were asynchronous throughout the whole course of a week
right, right,
via filling out a form and then live during an all hands meeting with other things going on the schedule. It was announced. And so it also was like really fun to then want to attend the meeting
yeah,
because
yeah,
not
that's
only were you
definitely
getting
true.
important business updates, but you were getting
Right.
this like fun culture building piece as well.
Absolutely. Yes, I love it. Right. And in fact, I love the fact that between you and Tam, you've set aside time, not necessarily that you're meeting, but you know that these are I mean, you don't have to go through the drill again and finding slots when you have to talk to each other. And I love the weekly ritual also where you are publishing your availability upfront. I think those two I'm going to take home and try to put it into action at GoFloaters. So now coming to the harder part of the problems that you might get involved in solving, right? Companies that have been office based and then they want to shift to remote, right? And we are seeing amidst all the RTO uh, related news that we're seeing, we're also seeing for every five companies, at least in India, I can see that one to two companies are going the other way around, right? They were office centric and now they're becoming remote first or remote centric, at least for certain functions to begin with, and eventually across the board, right? So and I'm very sure companies that have built culture, built rituals around the physicality of an office, right? And have set role models for others to follow, right? I mean, in an office. So, for example, I used to when I joined workforce, I had in Cognizant, I had specific role models that I will emulate, right? So, my boss's boss and the chief innovation officer of Cognizant, Sukumar, right? So I had visual role models that I could emulate, right? So for companies that have built all their rituals, built all their practices around being in a physical space, right, under one roof, when they transition into remote, how should they? I mean, number one, what do they get wrong in kind of translating that culture from an in-office culture to a remote culture? Because I've also seen that sometimes that also happens as there's a backlash that comes in. Hey, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months down the line, and they see that, hey, what happened to our culture, right? What happened to this is not us, right? This company is not the company that I created, right? So what did they get wrong? And second part of the question is like, how should they go about translating an office-based culture to a remote team-based culture?
Yeah, that's great. So, what people normally get wrong is they don't have a clear definition of culture to begin with. They just think they do. And so, again, I think in office cultures are really focused on time that you use to socialize with your peers, but they're not describing what are the standard operating behaviors. In what situations do you earn recognition or rewards? And in what situations are you not behaving in a way that aligns with the company's values? And so,
Right.
even making that mindset shift and not being aware of your own subconscious bias will really hurt companies when they shift from an office culture to a remote culture, because you can't do the same things necessarily, or you do them remotely, but it feels more like a sacrifice than a value add. But you can do different things that help you reach the same goal. And so you need to be really clear on what are your goals in developing culture,
Mm-hmm.
before you make that transition. And so the first step is always to sit down with, the executive team, depending on the size and the complexity of the company, like get other stakeholders involved as well in different functional areas and different levels of the organization, and really talk through what is our value and what behaviors correlate to this value. And so, for example, if you value transparency, in an office setting, it might mean you have an open floor plan. If you value transparency in remote work, it likely means that you have an amazing knowledge management system and that you're really good at documentation. They
Right.
mean different things, but it's leading towards the same value. And so
Right.
that is the number one thing that people get wrong. And so, how you can help your organization make this shift, and how I've helped organizations in the past. I have this example that I think is really like interesting. One of my favorite, projects that I've worked on in the past couple of years is helping a law firm figure out how to go to a hybrid model. What does that look like, and how do they want to use their time? And
Right.
so, one activity that you can do as you're thinking about this is, again, list out all of your values. In this scenario, a value of having, belonging and making people feel like they're part of the team. Well, in person, you might do that through like shared lunches,
Right.
or like events like having free food at meetings, and things like that. having really nicely designed office space so people congregate in a kitchen or a coffee area. But remotely, how do you do that? And so it could be something such as having dedicated time per week where people can share a moment when they're meant to be, working. So not like additional from their work hours, but share a moment that's like, tea time, and have a virtual tea time that's open for anybody that wants to join. And then
Mhm.
start asking questions. The question I like is how might I, which is a design, like a design thinking way of
Yeah,
approaching the
yeah.
situation. How might I create the same culture of belonging that people have over a shared meal if they're not actually sharing a meal together? And so then your answer could be, well, maybe we have tea time. One is maybe we have a channel where people that are really into sharing meals can share recipes instead, and then they can make the recipes on certain days of the week and share pictures. And so you start to think of all these ways of how you can do this differently. And the how might I can also be we get together monthly, and the focus is on relationship building in person. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot of hybrid companies do is saying like, okay, we're not going to have non-intentional lunches every day, but we are going to have one intentional team lunch a month or a quarter. And that's a very different way of thinking.
And I think the point that you're making is like the quality kind of makes up for the quantity, right? In an office, maybe there's a lot of the quantity is higher, and you could do all of these things around I mean, around being present. But when you, even if you do it once in a month or once in a quarter, the quality. In fact, I would say like companies. Some anecdotally, right? I've heard this from one of the head of CHROs, and in fact across the organization, is that now that once in a quarter, once in a month, that they do a city level meetup, everybody's looking forward to that, right? Everybody's kind of waiting for that to happen. Everybody wants to, they have a thought on what they would want to do, what they want, who they would want to go meet, right? Who they would want to kind of talk more to and all that. So when you kind of, in a way, the paucity of that opportunity also increases the value of this opportunity, right? So people try to make that intentionality, they're trying to make the best out of that opportunity is also there. So now shifting gears, right? And again, I love the examples you talked about, right? Transparency in an in-office environment and how that translates into transparency in a remote team, right? And I get asked this question, so let me add my 2 cents into it. Is that in my team of 15 people, the revenue dashboard, one way, right, one simple way, like you also talked about accountability earlier on as one of the challenges that people have, or one of the pillars that you work on in helping organizations, right? So one thing that we did earlier on in GoFloaters is that whatever revenue dashboard that me and my co-founder get to see on a day-to-day basis, everybody in the organization gets to see the same, right? So there's no filtering, there's no like uh, every action that they did the previous day, they can see how it moved the needle the next day, right? Or in real time basis, right? And everybody knows whether we're doing well, whether we're doing bad, right? So I don't have to tell them that, hey, we need to pull some strings here, right? We need to press the pedal here, right? So everybody knows that, right? I don't have to tell them the importance of what went wrong, or so that's one way. It also uh, helped us from explaining ourselves to people as to why we are doing certain things, right? They see that. So that's one way in which I don't know if I could call it a ritual, but that's like a practice, right? So transparency slash accountability practice. Uh, I mean, there's nothing hidden behind access credentials and role mapping and all that. So that's what just thought I'll share that for what it's worth. Now shifting to, we are almost 30 minutes past. So now coming to the across all the work that you've done, right? Across all the organizations that you work with, including your own, uh, uh, what according to you is that, like I know this is a cliched way to put it, but that's the title for our talk. So what is that secret sauce, right? What do you think are the companies that get it right? And obviously there will be companies that get one part of it right, one part of it wrong. But if you had to distill all of that, right, and say that uh, these three things, these four things, is what get companies to have a great positive remote culture.
Yeah. So I'm gonna take four things because I think that's good for a recipe of secret sauce. And I would say the four things are: number one, you need to be open to change. And we've talked a lot about that in a lot of the questions that you asked today. But in order to
Right,
be great at remote culture, you need to change the way that you're personally operating, how you're interacting with the team, and change the processes of how you get work done. And so you can't assume what you've learned in the early stages of your career that have got you to be successful are going to continue to be successful if you're
right,
working remotely. And so having that change management mindset is a critical skill for people moving forward at all levels of the organization. And I
right,
think that's, definitely the secret sauce there is like, how do you get good? How do you get comfortable managing change? Well, you
right,
accept that you're not going to be tied to an outcome. You accept that things will evolve as new technologies coming out, as your culture changes, as the goal of the company comes in. And you operate in a way where you ask questions and you question, why are we doing it this way? Is this because it's an old way of doing things, or is it because it's the efficient and effective way of doing things?
mhm,
And
mhm,
so that would definitely be my number one.
right,
My number two is more personal, but it really builds off of that. In order to be great at remote culture, you need to be comfortable unlearning things as much as you learn things. And so,
right,
people that really have, again, a mindset of personal growth, I think succeed really well in remote culture because you're learning skill sets of how to proactively hold yourself accountable. You're learning skill sets of how and when to work without someone, putting that subconscious pressure on you to work because you're located in a physical space. So, that would
right,
be my number two. Number three is pay attention to all of the nuances. You have to be really intentional about how you're designing what work looks and feels like with literally everything. Are there expectations around core work hours? Are there expectations in the country in which people work? Are there expectations around, certain work processes and rituals like giving status updates and things like that? And then number four, I would say, is setting clear expectations, which to me is making sure that everyone has shared vocabulary and a shared understanding of what you're talking about. Because you can
mhm,
say, yes, we're fully remote, but then how do you define fully remote? Like fully remote from one time zone, fully remote from one country, fully remote as long as you're on synchronous calls all day. So you need to define what it means in your
brilliant.
organization and then set the expectations around it. So those are the four things that I would say.
Brilliant, brilliant. I think all of them, but I specifically made special note of that, the first and the second, right? So the and in fact, it kind of brings the whole organization together, right? The first point, if I understood correctly, it's more top down driven, and the second point is more bottom up driven, right? So and then when they mesh together, is when the whole organization kind of is moving, advancing forward, right? They might be I mean, as in they're making real progress with their culture, right? Otherwise, like you said, practices could get outdated, right? Or it could just be ritual, without knowing the purpose of the ritual. You're just practicing it, right? You're just doing that, right? I think that those two kind of brought the organization together, in my point, right? And the two more questions before we end the call. One is like, uh, you have worked again with a lot of organizations across the world, specifically North Americas and Europe, right? If an Indian startup wanted yours and Tam's help, right? How should they go about doing that, right? What could they expect, right? The, the magic wand that you will come with, what could they expect that to weave? Yeah, so that, because I think, I mean, this video is going to just open up these questions, right? But eventually they need somebody to take them through the grind. So what could they be expecting from you, the two of you?
Definitely. So in order, I'll go with the easiest answer to the question first. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, or check out our website, remoteworksbook.com, for a better sense of, how we work with companies and also to get in touch. The things you can
Right,
expect is us asking you a lot of tough questions depending on what your needs are. And so getting comfortable, if you don't have the answer, to know that you'll have a framework and questions to bring awareness to get the answer.
Right.
And the ability to work in a wide range. And so you alluded to this at the very beginning of this call, but the easiest way to get my expertise, and if you like this call today, the way of thinking that I'm bringing to remote work alongside with Tam, is to buy the book. The book, it already has workshops that you can do with your team, templates and questions to make sure you're starting to learn the remote work skill set the right way. In addition to that, really helping build the skill set within the team is something that we
Mm-hmm.
focus on. So those 3 pillars we talked about in an earlier question. What
Right.
does communication skills look like in your organization? What does accountability and project management mean in your organization? And how do you offer true flexibility to make sure that your workers are productive? And so in terms of a training standpoint, that's something where you can get additional hands-on support, really interactive, and really thinking through how do we build this skill set for your team. And then finally, if there's like an even more customized request, that's when you reach out to me on LinkedIn and we see if it fits into one of the suites of products that we have available in terms of group coaching or even fractional work.
Right, right. Great. I think I'm sure all of this would be quite useful. Again, like I said, a lot of in another podcast with Peter Benet was saying that there's a lot of companies that are doing remote in India, right? More than what's available, what's visible outside on various social media and other channels, right? But I think a structured approach to knowing the right questions to ask, like you said, right, rather than we'll figure it out along the way, to get the process in place, right? Not the answers in place, but get the process in place to kind of navigate as you grow, as you scale, getting that process and getting that cycle in place, right? Is kind of, I
Exactly.
think, it will be crucial for somebody like you to come in and help, right? And the last question, your crystal ball. You've got a crystal ball in front of you, and this lot that's happened. Like, it was almost like everybody was waiting for 2023 to pass by, or maybe the half of the year to pass by, right? But then the second half of 2023 has seen so many, like the remote work party and the office party, right? So a lot that's happened, me versus them kind of a thing, right? So what do you see? Where do you see this going in 2024? And we are coincidentally on the last month of 2023. So what do you see 2023, 2024, and 2020? I mean, beyond, right? What do you see for remote work? And again, I'm talking about. It could be, you could take a specific geography if that's what you're comfortable, or you could paint the general picture across the board. Uh, what I mean, do you see the confusion? Because, like, even hybrid, I kind of started to hate the word hybrid, because it more or less, most of the times, doesn't it doesn't mean flexibility. It actually means more painful way to adjust than actually have the flexibility, right? So do you see better rational prevailing, I mean, more clarity coming in kind of organizations defining what it means to them, right? Do you see a clear line being drawn, right? So companies say, hey, if you want to work with me, you've got to be at the office, right? If you've got to work with me, remote is the way to go. So do you see a more the fog to settle down and a clear line to be drawn, or do you see uh, this being work in progress for a lot more time to come?
So I don't see it as a work in progress for a long, long time to come, but I still think we definitely have challenging days ahead of us and exploring these nuances before things get streamlined. And so I think up to this point, there's been really, unfortunately, I think, rising tension between these two camps. But I
Right.
think that the next years will bring awareness that it's not just these two ways of thinking. There's a lot of nuance involved. And so I think we're going to start digging into that nuance for the first time. And while it might be challenging before it gets better, I think companies, leaders, individual contributors will all realize that we need to make some changes, not just at the company level, but in some cases, like the societal and government levels as well, in
Hmm.
order to truly embrace remote work. I think there's growing confusion around a lot of topics that I lean on people way more knowledgeable than myself in terms of, international compliance, in terms of the freelance revolution and what it looks like to hire a team made up of mixed modalities of contractors and full-time employees. And finding more creative ways to offer those solutions is going to be a necessity moving forward from my perspective. And I think because people are starting to ask these questions, and because people have certain newfound demands, because they realize that very tactically remote work can work, um, is I think people are going to start putting the pressure on companies to start defining their culture, what their intentions are, and how they work. What does hybrid mean in your company? What does remote first mean in your company? And I do think eventually we'll get to the point where you can identify, this is a company that works for me and this is a company that doesn't. But right now, there's so much frustration over this confusion. And I think people are still working in the moment to address those things instead of taking the
Hmm.
higher view approach. And so I think the next year will start being about that higher view approach. Even in terms of hiring, right now a company might say they're remote and they get overwhelmed by the number of responses. And then what they really mean to say is they do expect some sort of office presence, or they do, only hire people in certain time zones. And it would be easier for everybody to just be respectful of people's time and energy by saying, this is how we define our company and this is what it means to us. And so I think
Right, right.
increased transparency to make that change is going to be huge. I think the other points that I see, and I'm not a true magician, I'm leaning on data to make these predictions, but something I love to follow, the Flex Index, which is a report that comes out quarterly
Yeah.
about
Right.
remote and hybrid. And their data backs up something that I believe, and I think you believe, we've talked about it today, that new
Right.
companies that are starting are going
Hmm.
to have levels of flexibility over companies in the past. And so we've seen that in their report, that companies starting after 2011 are increasingly more flexible than companies that started before 2011. And so I
Hmm.
think as companies start operating, they know what they have available to them. Um, and in terms of change management, smaller companies can easily make themselves remote, whereas larger companies, maybe it's a bigger ship to try to steer. And so those are data points that I believe in terms of the future of flexibility, will be offered by new companies, hands down.
Hmm.
And then an interesting prediction that I had, that your report, the Go Floater State of Hybrid Work, really backed up, is I do think there's a desire for more human connection and interaction, but by
Right.
intention. So not being forced. And an interesting statistic I saw when I was looking over the report that you shared with me is that surprisingly Thursdays are really popular days to go into co-working spaces. Actually,
Right.
Thursdays is when I lead my own co-working group with people
Oh,
that are not in my company, but people in my community. And I
right.
think what it means, what's interesting about this day, is that you've already gotten a few productive work days under your belt, and you're now wanting that human interaction and that connection. And so you're
Hmm.
going into places and environments where you can get some work done, but maybe it's not as urgent because you still have Friday maybe to get that stuff done, or you really did a good job Tuesday, Wednesday. And it's not as urgent anymore. And you can use that time to then have those lunches, those coffee chats, maybe go to a co-working space you're commuting there because you want to have a nice dinner after work. So I think there's going to be more ways that people are blending their personal desires with their professional desires around connecting with other people. And I
Very,
love
very,
that, that
very
that our
interesting.
days are aligned.
No, I never put a logic around it. I mean, I couldn't. I mean, I didn't put that kind of a logic around what you said. But now that you've kind of elaborated, that kind of makes sense, right? So you've uh, you've ticked a lot of boxes. You know that you've made enough progress. So, I mean, I hope it's not the Harren tortoise kind of so story where you end up like dozing off, right? But yeah, and I also feel that you need to kind of re-energize yourself, right? You've kind of done a lot of work. You need a little bit of a break. You need a little bit of interaction to re-energize and get back stronger on Friday and close the week on a high. But yeah, I mean, very interesting observation. Thank you, and thank you for going through that. I think I'm also quite interested, and it's quite interesting that you see some parallels and commonalities that emerge across uh, different geographies. This was amazing, Ali. Always, like I said, I've always, I mean, on LinkedIn, I've been uh, reading your posts. Now it's an amazing opportunity that I had to talk to you and do sync a conversation and talk about a topic that is near and dear to both of us. So it was very enlightening to say the least. And I specifically have taken a few ideas for rituals and ideas for the intentionality that I need to bring in and and like questions I need to keep asking for myself and my team because sometimes you like in the like your growth problems, your marketing problems, your product problems kind of overtake some of these other team dynamics kind of problems, right? And you sometimes I mean it always remains in the to-do list. So yeah, I think that it's a great awakening call for me to kind of start looking at some of those as well. And glad that I could have your time. Thank you for your time, and I'm also happy that you are open to work with a lot of companies from this part of the world. I think that it could be transformational for many companies that struggle with this. And the last that you want to see is like a company that's intentional about being remote, but then a hurdle that they initially face or the outcomes that they initially have stops them from going in that direction, right? So anything that could address that would be of great help. So thank you.
Yeah,
Glad
thank
to
you so
have
much.
spoken to you.
It was great to be here. And yeah, for all those companies, the work is worth it.
Absolutely, I think I think that's very it's very true, right? So a little bit more patience and a little bit more open mindset will get you through that before you even realize that.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Ali, and all the best for you and your team as well, and happy holidays. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye bye.